Segregation laws and attitudes in the South. The segregation laws in the South were known as the Jim Crow laws, and these were in the southern states of America between 1876 and 1965. They segregated whites from blacks in things like schools, public places, and on public transport. Alongside these laws, the black codes limited civil rights and civil liberties for black Americans. These included bringing in laws that would make it impossible for black Americans to vote, including a poll tax they couldn't afford to pay, and a literacy test marked by white Americans who would almost always fail these people. Black American men who'd returned from the Second World War in Europe increasingly challenged this, saying, well, my friends got injured and died alongside white people. The Germans, when they were shooting, didn't care if I was black or white. Why don't we get the same? Many businesses, as you can see from this photograph here, almost put their own laws on. They lost money simply because they wanted to keep blacks at the bottom and whites dominant. This meant that black Americans found they couldn't even buy houses in certain areas, couldn't find work in certain areas with certain companies, and certain trades that had decent money attached to them, they were banned from joining. One group that had been around since 1866 but had gone quiet in recent times decided that if black people and men soldiers coming back from the war were going to challenge this idea of white domination, they would have to restart their campaign. When the Klan was originally formed, its idea was to maintain slavery. And a lot of the plantations where slavery was used was in the south of America, and that's why the southern states were much more hostile to black Americans than the north. The Klan had been at its strongest just before World War I. In 1910 alone, 67 black Americans had been lynched. This lynching was not uncommon, but by 1952, society had told them this was out of order. And once the civil rights movement began its actions, Klan groups re-established itself to challenge it. They bombed houses, they intimidated people, they did assassinate, but the open lynching that they did before was more of a thing of the past. In Atlanta, for example, 40 homes were bombed in a 2-year period. Many murders were never reported. As black Americans couldn't vote, and juries were often white only, blacks didn't ever expect if their house had been bombed that they would get the person brought to justice who did it. Klansmen especially had links with local police, government, judges, and they used these arms of the law to intimidate much more.